Awesome. So as far as I understand, I'm the last slot that's sitting between you and the party. So I'll try to be as brief and interesting as possible. I heard there would be drinks and also Berlin techno, so I'm pretty excited about it. Anyway, the topic, about mentoring. Maybe before I jump into the topic, maybe I can start with actually explaining a bit my path, where I started my career, was mentored quite a bit, and then end up being the mentor, because I think it's an interesting little thing to have. So I basically started my career as an Android engineer. Over 10 years ago, I started to fiddle with Android at university. I was building some little apps to have my uni schedule on my phone. And then I continued and did some engineering studies, where I had the chance of being part-time at school and part-time at work. I was working in this really interesting little company where it was basically 3 iOS engineers and myself. And at that time, it was really interesting and really fun, because basically I could do pretty much whatever I want. So I had my boss showing up in the morning with an iPhone and being like, oh, can you build the same thing on Android? And that was it. That was the specification. So I could do pretty much whatever I wanted with the design, the implementation, architecture, testing. Could do whatever I want as long as this was working and the client was happy. And I did this for a couple of years, and a lot of fun. I was just starting and just pounding on my keyboard away. And after a while, I realized that maybe there's a better way of doing these things, rather than having this 1,000, 2,000 line activity, all this async task everywhere. And I was starting to then read a lot of articles, looking at a lot of talks. But this was kind of like something I was doing on my own. And I kind of realized that it would be interesting to have actually someone that could teach me these things and with whom I could, bounce questions. You cannot really bounce questions much with like articles and video on YouTube. And then I left, and I joined another company here in Berlin, actually, called Novoda. They were in between Berlin and London back in the days. And there I had the chance of having a lot of really interesting people that mentored me, that I really had a lot of experience and from whom I could learn really a lot. There's actually one in this room right now, which is quite exciting as well. And yeah, I learned, I spent 5 years there, and I learned so much. And then I moved on to Trade Republic, right? That's it, I think, on top, right. And as I've been at Trade Republic for 2 years now. And yeah, I ended up being one of the most experienced person there. And I was, out of nowhere, kind of moved into this role of, okay, now I actually need to also transfer my knowledge and help people grow and getting up to speed. So that's where I'm here right now, and this is kind of like my journey through mentorship that I would like to guide you through. This is me, this is my name, this is my position, company, and where I live, if anyone is interested. And Trade Republic, I'm pretty sure quite a bunch of you might have had some ads on YouTube about it. But for those who don't know about Trade Republic, we basically want to make it easy, fast, and free for everyone to access the capital markets. And then, also save money and build wealth using savings plans on ETFs and stocks, all of this free of commission. And one quote that kind of resonated was thrown on by someone recently at my company, which is, we are a tech company with a banking license rather than the other way around, being a bank with a cool tech team. So I think that's also put things a bit more in perspective. Maybe we can start with basic definition of maybe what's mentoring. So mentoring is basically some kind of learning relationship between an experienced person, so usually called mentor, and someone who wants to grow, a mentee. And if we translate this into the software engineering, it's usually someone more senior that's helping someone more junior kind of grow. And it's probably something you've already been doing, or that I hope you received in the past, but maybe in a less formalized way. But why would you do this, right? Why would you spend, it does take a lot of time. Why do you spend time actually teaching and mentoring internally at your company? One thing I find really interesting with mentees is that they usually, or new joiners in general, right, they usually have really fresh outlook on the project. So it's usually people that are kind of like questioning a lot, why are we doing this? Why are you using this library? What's the story about this? And then it acts a bit as a rubber duck, right? So you start explaining, and then you actually realize, okay, you know, we made this decision 2 years ago because of some legacy reason that actually are not there anymore. So it's this interesting kind of like rediscovering everything with them as well, and make you also think a bit about these bits and pieces that you think are settled and don't need to move anymore. And then you also, when someone join a company, it's quite stressful. So it's also a really good thing that you're kind of like the link between your mentee and the rest of the team. So whenever the mentee needs something, just ask you, and then you just, in IT term, dispatch the request, and then come back to you, and you can help your mentee instead of having them having to interact with a large number of people. And then I guess this is something we are all seeing at the moment, and it's been there for a while still. But at the moment, we have quite a bit lack of developers, and it's quite a bit worse at the senior level. So what you can do instead is growing the people you already have in your team, growing them to a level where they can, participate more in like high-level decisions and be more productive maybe, or these kind of things. And then this one maybe is a bit more, the two last one are maybe a bit more personal, but I think this is also nice to give back to the community, right? I was mentored, I mentor, and hopefully we have this circle of the mentee would at some point also mentor someone else, and we have this nice circle of people learning from each other. And the last point, it's also a really good way to build long-lasting professional relationships. So I still have quite some contact with my mentor, and I hope to have in the future contact with my mentees as well. Right. So you have someone new joining your team. They are a bit less experienced. They need to grow to be able to collaborate properly in the code base. But like, where do you start? So usually you always have this first catch-up, where the very first talk that you have with this new joiner. And I think there's a bunch of things that can be done to make sure that this goes smoothly and with as less stress as possible. So I think we've been all there. We join a new company, and it's like quite stressful, right? It's so much new stuff. Maybe you're not that experienced, and it's one of your first job. You're not sure, how to prove that, you're there for a good reason and that you have the skills that are needed. So I think one thing that should really be, put the accent on is to try to make it as stress-free as possible for the mentee. So there's a bunch of things that can be done for this. Usually, maybe you can set some expectations on the first few months, right? You don't have to be from day one running around and writing PRs and merging code, right? This is something that's going to take a while before you're able to do this, and maybe the first few months for you, your goal is to grow and to learn how we do things, and being able to, at some point, collaborate in the code base. But this is not something that's expected right away. Same with mistakes. We've all made mistakes, and this is expected that the mentee would do some mistake at some point. So I'm trying to stress that we are in an environment where it's fine to do mistakes, it's fine to learn from mistakes. And the last one, which is quite important also, to try and have an environment where the mentee doesn't feel stupid to ask questions, right? There's no stupid question. You have a question, please ask it. And it's fine, we learn all together. We've all been there at the beginning, so you have a question, you ask it, and we figure this out together. And then maybe one of the first sessions where you, with the mentee, right, is to maybe going over the code base together. And we can go over, okay, what's the history of the code base? What are some of the most important components? Maybe what issues do we have at the moment? How do we plan on addressing them? And then depending on all these questions, right, you can also ask them how comfortable they are with unit testing, how much, like in our code base, for instance, we have a lot of functional reactive programming, like how much do they know about this, like do they know about specific library we are using. And based on all these questions that are asked by the mentee or not, it's also a good first glimpse to see where the mentee might lack knowledge and where you should maybe put some effort. Another really good way is also just simply to ask them. I think there's a lot of more junior software engineers that are already aware where they're lacking knowledge, be it in testing, be it in how you write Kotlin code. Yeah. So this is also a good way to figure this out. And then in terms of first task, so at Trade Republic, we have a pretty extensive company onboarding, and then after that, usually as the mentee to go over our wiki and documentation that we have. I would say we have an OK wiki on the Android team. We have quite some interesting bits and pieces in there that are useful to get, to know the code base. And then ask them also to go on their own time without the stress on me being over their shoulder when we look at the code base, and then to just have a look at the code base themselves, go as deep as they want anywhere, and just write about, how questions they have or things they would like to go a bit more in depth. And the third one is, I think, a quite interesting one. I also usually ask them to go through all the open PRs we have every day, block some time to go over all the PRs. And the goal is not for them to review the PR. If they want to review the PR, they can. But the goal for them is just to get used to how we do PRs and how do we write code in there. And their only goal, their only expectation there is to just ask questions. So the whole team needs to be on board with this, right? But it's nice to have the mentee going really through the PR and asking questions, why are we doing this here? What is this actually? What is this component? What is this for? And then this is a nice way for them to not have that much pressure on like, I really need to review this PR. It needs to be really, I don't know, intelligent remarks. I need to absolutely find something in this PR to, put a comment in there. But it's just casually to go through the PR, and whenever we have a question, they just ask it. And then another thing that can be done as well is a bit of a learning plan, right? So maybe to give some example, in the past I had maybe a mentee that was not really comfortable with XJava. I think not so much people are actually really comfortable with XJava in general. But yeah, so then we came up with a plan, right? Maybe found some kind of repo with exercise, and then leave them do the exercise for a while, and then kind of look at it together, how they did it, where they struggled, and then we kind of like figure out this together. I was also writing very specific things from our code base that we have to do quite often with XJava, and then working on this together. Or it can be, maybe they are not that experienced with unit testing, so we can take an old legacy view model and have them writing tests for it. Or they might, come from a Java background and have no idea about Kotlin. So then we can just go on the Kotlin, do a bit of a Kotlin kata or something. So I'm trying to figure out something that fits for everyone, right? Or it can be also just reading books. That's also a really nice asynchronous way of, you don't really know about this bit, then I know this book that's quite nice. Read the first few chapters and then we discuss. This is also a possibility. Yes, so you start, but then you need also to keep it going, right? This is not a one-day thing. Mentoring is something that takes quite some time. So you want to keep it going, so what I do is a lot of pairing. This one is a bit of a tricky one. I honestly think that's the best way to work with a mentee. It's also, I think, the most stressful one. Because I come from my previous company where we are really used to do a lot of pairing. So it was kind of like a second nature for me, and I didn't really think about this much at the beginning, so that was also one of my mistakes. But I found it to be insanely stressful for the mentee, because then you're like really pairing with this person that's been in the company for a while, that is your mentor, and then they look at you writing code, right? And it's like, I should not mess this up. So it's kind of like a lot of repetition around. It's not me looking at what you're doing and judging your code. It's us working together on a task. So I found to be easier to start by driving myself. So we're having the mentee in the backseat, making comments. And then little by little, when I see they start to be more comfortable, then I can start to have them for a short period of time also driving and writing code. But always then stressing also like, this is us working together and this is not me judging what you're doing. I find it almost, yeah, I usually also then put pairing blocks in the calendar, otherwise there's always something that needs to be done and a way to avoid pairing. So just put pairing blocks in the calendar work quite well. And then in terms of small tasks, right, what kind of task can you give your mentee at the very beginning? So also to keep the pressure off, I usually find it quite nice to have them working on little small bugs or maintenance tasks, but nothing too vital or nothing that has a deadline on it, right? So they can spend the time they need to do it, and then we can also pair on this. And then it also requires for the mentor a lot of time and also a lot of patience. And this is where we also need to have the management on your side, right? Because unfortunately, mentoring is not as visible as just smashing some Jira tickets, right? It's not that visible. So it's also, I think, important to kind of like have the management on your side and also them understanding that this takes quite some time on your day-to-day. Yeah, in terms of areas of growth, so I kind of like split them into 4 loose categories. I think the first one is around solving skills. So I've listed 4 here. I kind of like all somewhat similar. But what I find usually when I start to work with a mentee is that we need to start on explaining how to go through a task. Because usually what I see is people just jumping straight into the code and just pounding the keyboard until the task is finished. Which is an approach that works, that also takes quite some time, and that's also quite error-prone. So I spend a lot of time working on what I say probably 1,000 times per pairing session, which is taking a step back. And it's all about, okay, we have this ticket, let's go over the ticket together, let's think about what are the different solutions we could apply there, and then let's pick one that makes sense in our context or in our constraints. One mistake I made at the beginning as well is that I was just basically looking at the ticket and being like, yep, let's do it like this. I don't think this is really helpful for the mentee because they miss all the path that the mentor took to actually took this decision. So I spend a lot of time asking them what they think, what kind of solution we could apply, and then maybe I throw a bunch of other solutions myself, and then we discuss together all these solutions and then end up picking a way to do it. And then there's also I also find usually when I jump into a pairing session, at times I end up in the IDE and everything is red and nothing has been committed in the last 4 hours. So I also work on kind of trying to slice the task in little bits that can be committed with the focus on always having the code compiling. So you can always come back. Instead of having like this, okay, I wrote this 20 class in the last 4 hours and everything is red and I don't know what to do now. So trying to really work on this process of doing things Schritt für Schritt or step by step. Also around over engineering, this is something I see quite often also with more junior developers. There's this tendency of trying to show that we know. Like I know a lot of things about Kotlin, so I'm going to write this code that could be written in 5 clear lines. I'm going to write it in 2 insane Kotlin, really intense lines. So also trying to usually in this case, I always take the example of okay, what if tomorrow we have a new joiner and they come around this piece of code without having any context about the code base? Would they be able to understand it, how readable this is? And then try to work also on this aspect. So yeah, taking a step back. Soft skills. This one is also a bit of a tricky one. So to come back to the example where we have the mentee ask me for my help because they are stuck in a technical problem, doesn't matter which one. I usually arrive and see the ID being all red, and it's like, oh yeah, I was doing this and it just doesn't compile, and it's just, I'm stuck and I don't know how to go on. And then I usually try to work on, again, taking a step back. What's the context? What tickets are you working on? And this is something that's needed everywhere at the company, right? It's not something that's limited to the ID. You go to a meeting, you need to explain the context. You need to explain what you try, what is your goal, and how you want to go there. So this is something also that I really try to work on. Participating efficiently to meetings as well. So this understanding of kind of like not being too passive in a meeting, and it's not like I have this meeting, I need to attend, and then I just wait for the time to pass by, or maybe I throw comments here and there, but more around this. We are all in this together in the meetings, and we are all can make this meeting more engaging and also probably less long. So this kind of like trying to understand what's the purpose of the meeting, how we can get there, always kind of like having a decision at the end, and if it's too big or like too complex to have a decision, then having at least some action points. And the last one is very tricky. It's something I've made multiple times the mistake. You want to have your mentee kind of listening to what you're saying and kind of like making their own mind and taking a decision. And you don't want to have a mentee that just do whatever they think is best without listening to you, and you also don't want to have a mentee that just whatever you say, yes, right? So you want to have something that is in between, where you want to have a mentee that is able to go his own way and take his own decision without following you blindly. So like an example, for instance, would be they work on a ticket, they put up a PR, and then I go on the PR, and maybe I don't have as much context as they have because I haven't worked on this feature, and I put a comment. Maybe a generic comment would be like, oh, maybe we could do this, this other way, because I think this is probably not the best one because X, Y, and Z. And then instead, I really try to have a conversation there, and instead of having a conversation, then I see next commit is just them following blindly what I said. So you want to have a discussion with them, trying to make them understand that you also want to have their input on what is your suggestion, and not having them following blindly whatever you say. And this one is a bit of I find this one to be quite tricky, to be honest. Organizational skills. The first one is usually something I kind of try to kind of like express right away. It's time boxing. So usually what I find, again around the mentee joining a new company and trying to show what they can do and what they know, is that at times it happens that they get stuck for days at a time on something without, telling you. Because if they tell you, then in their mind it shows that they don't know how to do this. Maybe they think, the mentor has never time, I'm going to waste their time. So trying to have this discussion around, it's fine if you waste a bit of time, because I think it's actually healthy, right? It's actually healthy to spend some time on a task and really trying. But you want to have something that is a good middle ground, so that's something that is between the mentee is blocked for a minute, and right away you give the solution and you enter the code base, and you also don't want to have the mentee struggling for 3 days at a time. So you need to find like a sweet spot. So usually what I do is I would have a pairing session with them, and then maybe we work on something for 2 hours, and then I see, I leave them up to their task, and then I see they might get stuck. So what I do usually is I look at the time and I'm like, okay, it's 2 p.m. Maybe by 4 p.m. if you're still, struggling on this task, then ping me on Slack and we have a bit of a call and we figure this out together. Trying to find like a really interesting, points between these two extremes. Using the tools more effectively. So actually earlier there was a quite nice presentation around IDE shortcuts. I'm personally really into them as well. So I spend a lot of time making my mentee going Command Z, Command Z, Command Z, and then doing, for instance, some refactoring shortcuts or like renaming a variable. So this is one aspect of the thing, I think. Getting to know your tools is really important. It helps with being more effective, being more at ease also with your tools. Another one might sound a bit stupid, right? But maybe using Slack a bit more efficiently, right? Getting to know about the fact that you can click on the message and ask Slack to remind you in 2 hours, for instance, if you right now are in a deep work and you don't want to be distracted by this, but you also don't want to forget about it. Or like managing some to-do list, or maybe scheduling a message when it's kind of late and you don't want to ping someone at 6 or 7 p.m., but then you can just schedule something for tomorrow and don't forget about it. So this kind of, or like some tips and tricks with the command line, anything goes. The next one is also quite interesting, I would say. Also trying to have the mentee understanding on how to have healthy working habits. So this goes again in the category of the mentee just join and they really want to show, I know what I'm doing, and I want to succeed. It's important, at least when they just join, to maybe keep an eye a bit. I'm not saying to look at all the commits, but maybe keeping an eye at, if a PR has been open quite late, or if some code has been committed on the weekend, these kind of things. And then having a bit of a discussion with them around, if at 7 p.m. You're still stuck on something, then you close the laptop and just fix this tomorrow together, right? Another aspect of this thing as well, and it's the other way around a bit, is that if you have this discussion with your mentee, you also need to do what you preach. So if the mentee see you always working until 10 p.m. every day, opening PR on the weekend, then they feel forced to do the same, right? I'm going to have a look at the time quickly. Good. In terms of presenting skills, in terms of pull requests, so this part is named a bit weird, but it's more around pull requests. So how to write a good PR description, for instance. So in the Android team, for instance, we try to really have really good PR description that goes kind of hand in hand with what I was explaining earlier with the context. But having a PR that explains the context, explain what has been done, maybe explain some, I was trying to do this, but I struggled quite a bit. I'm not sure how to do this properly, or I took this technical decision, I'm not sure it's the best. And then having a bunch of GIFs or images if you did some UI changes, for instance. We do also something that's quite interesting. I've not seen this being done at much companies. We also self-review our PRs, which I think is a really, really good tool for mentees as well. So we go on the PR we just open, and we comment out things. So maybe, I had to take a shortcut there. So I just put a comment in my PR being like, I really had to do this. I wasn't too sure how to do this in another way. Does anyone have an idea? And this is a really good tool for the mentee to highlight part of the PR where they might know that this is not the best way to do, but they are not sure how to fix this, and to ask help from the people reviewing. It's also way easier for the people reviewing to just spot the comments and respond under it. No, I think that's fine. This is actually how we do usually. Or, I think we can do this better. Maybe let's jump in a pairing session. The next one is a bit of a hard one as well, and it's something definitely where I did some mistake as well, is how do you define that a PR is too big, right? So I think at the beginning, what I remember, I had this discussion with multiple mentees where I was like kind of throwing out these magic numbers. Okay, maybe there's more than 700 changes. Maybe it's time to split the PR, right? The problem with this approach is that then I started to see PRs that were split in a really weird way, or I would see a PR that is exactly 700 lines and another one that was 15. So you want to have a bit of a discussion, like I know IT is 0 and 1, but there's also a lot of gray when you actually write code. So this one is a bit more around kind of understanding what is too big in terms of how much energy would it be for someone to review it, how much energy would be someone to actually figure out the logic and understand and be able to review this appropriately. So maybe this one you can reverse it a bit more, and maybe it just means that you actually need to discuss a bit more how to slice tickets into PRs. Maybe you start on a new feature and you open a first PR that is just the data and the domain layer, and then you have another one that is more around the presentation layer. So commenting etiquette is also an interesting one, I find. So what I get quite frustrated about on my own PRs as well is when I get comments like, I don't think that's a good way to do it, or I think this is not the best naming. Great, so what? What do I do now? So I try to have my mentee also having an approach where whenever they say that something could probably be done in another way, to suggest something. And then you have a discussion under it. Cool. Yeah, things to keep in mind. I think it's really important to deliver constant feedback to the mentee. So what I usually do is I keep a bit of a to-do list, and whenever I see something that could be improved, could be worked on, then I write it down, and then during our catch-up, then we go through those, or we go through whatever we want to discuss about. I think this is a good approach. The other way around this is I tend to only do this and deliver, well, not negative feedback, but things that can be improved. So I think it's also really, really important to actually also highlight things that improved or things that's been done like in an awesome way. So I think delivering constant feedback, yes, but also celebrating the success, right? Need to have this balance. Yeah, the other one was what I was talking a bit earlier, guiding, but not telling them what to do. So instead of going like, yeah, let's just go there and do this, trying to have a bit more an approach where you ask them first what they think, and then based on that, you also have a really good idea of where they are, right? Because if they suggest solutions that maybe don't really make sense still in this context, then you can discuss, okay, why do you think we should do like this? And what about this one? And what about this one? So yeah, really kind of trying to have more of a conversation rather than being a bit of a dictator and being like, this is how we do things. Adapting the pace of the mentorship as you go as well. So what I realize is at the beginning, I tend to pair quite often. And then the more I pair, the less I need to pair, because they just grow and get just better at doing quite a bunch more tasks. And I think it's really good to have this in your mind, right? It doesn't make sense to have 4 pairing sessions a week if in half of the pairing session is just having awkward silences. Yeah, and then maybe at some point also, then there's no mentorship that's needed anymore, right? You see that every time you have a pairing session, you just don't have much to talk about, and then this is also fine to end there. A little Zusammenfassung, as the German like to say. So I think if I had to put, if my kind of presentation was only 3 bullet points, I think it would be those. Trying to always create a safe environment where the mentee can grow. So where the mentee feels, they can be safe to ask any question. They feel also that they can pair with you easily. They don't feel stressed about it. So really trying to spend quite some time being really reassuring, even if you have to repeat it like 100 times. But most of the discussion I have, at least at the beginning and even after, are around, this is fine, please ask me any question you have, there's no stupid question. I think this is really important to keep in mind. I think one of the best tools you have at your disposal, but one of the most stressful as well for the mentee is pairing. This is where you can really learn a lot together. And have, especially unfortunately during Corona, right? So in the last 2 years, I've done a lot of pairing on Slack. It's not probably the super ideal tool, but I've found it to work quite okay. One is just driving, typing, and the other one is just drawing stuff around. Works quite well. But yeah, it's also stressful on the mentee, so also try to keep in mind and maybe start with driving for the beginning, and then offer them to drive here and there. And then always keep an eye open on what can be improved, and then also what has been improved, right? So delivering feedback, but also celebrating successes. And that's where come we're hiring slide. So we are actually hiring for a lot of different positions. So not only Android, but basically backend, SRE, and everything in between. One fun fact is that most of our stack is actually Kotlin. So our Android code base is 100% Kotlin. Our backend is, I think, 98% Kotlin. We have some Python here and there, I think, from legacy systems. Only the iOS are, unfortunately. But this is Swift, so this is close enough, I would say. And yeah, is there any questions?